The next step, we're actually going to want to place the moving eye so that it starts by default at the same location as our back eye, the eye facing the three objects together. We'll go ahead and do this by placing it. Our object here this is our eye point that's currently selected. We're just going to want to push it back to our eye point, our back eye. However, let's say, for instance, that we don't have that eye point there, so we don't know exactly where we want to move this. An easy way to place this object is to use the eye point viewer in the top window. So I'll select the eye point. Default ortho, we'll go to moving eye. And at first, we're not going to see anything at all on that top screen. To see why, all we have to do is look down in this view, and we can actually see that the moving eye is actually pushed well forward of everything. So we know this moving eye is going to have to go back. And usually I would just click and drag with the left mouse button. But to actually see what's going on here, I'm actually going to hold down the left arrow and actually allow you to see the change real time inside the top window. So what I can do is actually place my eye point pretty much the way I'm going to want it to look in the application. And we'll see as I bring it out, go ahead and zoom in here so we can actually compare. We see at this point I'm very, very close to my back eye. And this is the view that we're going to end up wanting for the moving eye. Now another thing we can do with the moving eye, another quick feature I'd like to show, inside our Object Properties tab, we have a little section that we can expand out called Preview Eye Point Movement. If we expand this, I'm going to go ahead and have to push this forward a little bit more. We'll see we have two main options. We have our eye or group name, and we have a move time. If I were to specify an eye point in this column, let's say we want to move to the left camera. We know that our left camera's eye point name is left cam, so we'll type that in here. And we want a move time of 2 seconds. Now, if I hit play, we'll be able to see an animation demonstrating what this will look like in real time. I can use this to move back and forth between the different cameras, but in this case, I'm going to go ahead and just push it back. So type in back cam for the eye or group name and hit play. We'll see the eye point move back to its original position. Okay, so we have our moving eye. We've shown how to place the moving eye in the scene using our split view, and we've shown how to preview the movement of the eye point. The next thing we're going to want to do is create our interface. First thing I'm going to do is actually collapse all of our views. And we're going to go ahead at this point. I'm going to go ahead and minimize our groups. I want to select our geometry and our button group. And I want to combine these together into a single GLS multi-view. The multi-view object, the multi-view plugin, is this icon right here, which looks like a cube with a strip of squares right next to it. So I click this, and we'll notice that immediately our scene disappeared. There is a reason for this, but first I'm going to go ahead and rename our object. I'm going to call it Multiview. And let's remove that. Okay. So we have our multi-view, slightly poorly named, and it's just getting worse. We're going to go ahead and leave that alone. Let's go ahead and move straight to the Object Properties tab. We're going to take a look at some of the settings we have inside this. The first two that are very important are our draw states. We have Draw State Editor and Draw State Runtime. These determine exactly how our application is going to process this multi-view. We have options for both the editor and the runtime. They're the same for both. We're going to look at the editor options. We have geometry only, geometry and views, views only, and disabled. We're going to go ahead and select geometry only at first, just so you can see that doing this brings us right back to where we were. What this will tell us is, while we're in the editor, we're going to be able to see the geometry exactly as it's being placed in the way we normally see it in GL Studio. If we switch this to geometry and views, we'll be able to see all of our views, and if there's any geometry that's visible behind it, we'll be able to see that geometry as well. But we're going to go ahead and stick with views only for now, because that'll give us the best idea of what we're going to see in our application at runtime. So we'll select views only. and we'll go ahead and expand out the views. This is where all the work is going to be done. Let's go ahead and shrink this a little bit. And I'll expand our eye point group so we have a reference. So we notice we're going to have a collection of views. We're going to end up creating 5 views, the first of which will be our actual geometry, that moving eye that we just created. And then the other ones are going to be our individual buttons, which our buttons, as we've seen earlier, have eye points already attached to them. So we'll go ahead and start. The first thing I'd like to point out about the Multiview is that just like with the Geometry tab, the Multiview has a draw order. That draw order is determined top to bottom, just like in GL Studio. So we're going to want anything that's going to be rendered in the background to be present at the very top. We notice that as soon as I add a view, we have some generic values filled in. In this case, we're drawing relative, filling the entire screen, using an initial eye point of the parent's view. This particular view is visible, pickable, and the geometry inside can be picked as well. And the clear background color and depth will be going back into that in just a moment. The first thing we're going to want to do is take a look at the options. We have draw. Draw can be one of two things, either relative or pixels. This is going to determine what the bottom, left, top, and right options mean. In this case, we're going to leave it relative, but pixels would literally be pixel space. Bottom, left, top, and right, in the case of relative, literally are clamped values from 0.0 to 1.0, representing what percentage of the screen these take up. Our background is going to be visible at 0011, which means from the bottom left corner at 0% and top right at 100%, it's going to take up the entire screen. This is, of course, what we want. However, the view inside the Multiview right now is not correct. We're going to change the initial eye point. Instead of saying parent's view, we're going to select our moving eye. And this will give us the view that we want. We do want this to be visible. Pickable and pick geometry is really up to us in our application. In this case, I do want to go ahead and manipulate the buttons on the MFD and the altimeter at runtime, so I'll go ahead and leave these checked. And then clear background, we're going to be clearing both the color and the depth buffers. This is okay for this. However, for our other buttons, we're going to want to show our geometry behind we're going to want to show any geometry behind the buttons. So we're going to go ahead and turn off the color. We're just going to leave depth buffer being cleared. We'll be able to see this effect later. So let's go ahead and add a couple new ones. We're going to be adding a total of 4. 2, 3, 4. We'll start at the top. We'll notice that immediately when I created the second view, everything kind of reverted back to the way it was. This also is the reason for this is the draw order. Since our view at the top is drawn behind everything that's after it, we've just pretty much obscured it because we're once again drawing 100% of the screen. For this reason, it's typically good, instead of creating all of your views at once, it's good to typically work your way up. So we're going to go ahead and delete our old views. We're just going to start with 2. So we have a relative view. We're going to go ahead and add the back button first. So let's go ahead and set the initial eye point. We're going to set it to back button eye. We'll notice that we have a giant button now taking up the entire screen. This is because that's exactly what we told it to do. We want it to take up from 0% to 100% bottom left to top right. Of course, this isn't what we really want. We're going to want this to take up the bottom center of the screen. So we'll set the following values. Bottom, we're going to leave this at 0%. However, for the top, we're going to change this value, and we're going to want it to say about 0.2. So you're going to want it to go 20% up. Already we can see a change. Our geometry that was in view 1 is back and present, and our back button is still present. However, it's taken up the entire bottom fifth of the screen, and it's 100% across left and right, so which is what gives it its stretched appearance. We're going to go ahead and set a couple other values for this. We need the left and the right, and we're going to make these go 10 units. We're going to go 0.45 to 0.55. You can see that as soon as I typed in the left, the change has taken effect. We're going to see this thing get a lot smaller once I hit 0.55, and there's a reason for this. All right. Let me split this view to give us a better idea of what we're looking at. Okay, this is going to be about the window frame at runtime. We notice that these are stretched up, and there is a reason for this. And the reason is because of, if I click on our eye point for our back cam, we're going to take a look at some of the properties for eye points to see exactly why I'm getting this strange stretch on the bottom left and right screens. The reason for this is our use of constraints. Our object here is square, so I set up the eye point to be square as well. The back camera is orthographic, and it has a size of 500 and 500 units. Now the horizontal constraint is set to exactly, the vertical constraint is set to none. What this does is allows us, whenever we set up the horizontal boundaries for this object, the vertical constraints are going to go ahead and they're not going to be stretched to match, so you're not going to have the stretching effect on the vertical side. Instead, if you have anything above or below the object, it's going to be visible. I'm going to go back to the back cam, so we can, or the multi-view, the view, so we can see exactly why we did some of the things we did here. The bottom to the top is 20 units, 0.0 to 0.2. The left and the right is only 10 units, 0.45 to 0.55. The reason I did this was twofold. One, I don't want the button to be located exactly on the bottom. Like I don't want the button to actually be touching the bottom of the screen. I want it raised up slightly. Two, I wanted the button to actually not be skewed at all. If I set this to 0.1, we kind of see what I'm talking about here. Notice the end effect. Let me set this back. The end effect is this button got clamped, and this is more because of the way our viewport's laid out. I set it to 0.2 so that I get a little bit of the extra spacing, and I know the button is shaped perfectly within my multi-view, regardless of how my view is actually set up. The one pitfall to this, if I have buttons exactly above or below the object, if I have a viewport that's set up strangely, like my lower left and lower right, we can actually see these buttons appear up to, or going up the screen. Now for our application, I've actually set the screen size to be a widescreen display similar to this one, and this will be the end result. So we've created our back button. I'm going to go ahead and quickly add 3 more buttons. We have our relative. I'm going to go ahead and set, these are going to take up the top half of the screen, 0.8 to 1. And then our button placement will go from 0.15 to 0.25. Once again, 10 units on the left and right. For the far left, I'm going to use the ADI's button's eye, and we'll actually be able to see this. The ADI takes shape within my multi-view, located up top. We're going to go ahead and add another one, also 0.8 to 1. This one goes from 0.45 to 0.55, so it's centered with the back button, just taking up the top half of the screen. And we're going to set the MFD button eye for this one. And then finally, once again, 0.8 to 1. This one goes from 0.75 to 0.85. And this will be our altimeter button eye. Now once again, we're seeing this effect with our strange-looking geometry. If we want to fix this, there's a way to do it. So we don't actually have to worry about seeing our geometry stretching above or below because of the way we set up our constraints. We'll do that by this way. First, we'll go back to our draw state. Instead of the editor, will be geometry only. We'll take us back to our original views. I'm going to go ahead and collapse down to a single screen. We can see we have our 3 objects. We're going to go ahead and select the eye points and the buttons for each object, ADI and ADI. And we'll just literally drag these so that instead of being vertical on each other, they'll just be horizontal. So now, when we go back to our multi-view and we turn on views only, even with this warped screen size, we still get the desired effect. One other thing I'd like to mention, we're going to go back to the color and depth for the clear background. What we're going to want is, just in case we're using a smaller screen, let me split the views a couple more times. Say the screen is very small. We can see that as I get the MFD up into the area where the buttons are, all of a sudden the buttons are being clipped. And this is because of that value. If I set this from color and depth just to depth only, we'll be able to see the effect. Of course, this would only be true if the depth was in fact equal. Let me go ahead and set this really quick. Might actually be best to show this at runtime anyway. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and make this change. We're actually going to be able to see it at runtime. Let's go back to views only. Of course, it would also help if I would remember to click my cameras as well, which is why everything kind of disappeared on me a second ago. Here we go. Okay. So I have everything set up the way I want it. We have color and depth. We have depth only here, and one more depth only. What this will do, of course, when we get back to the actual application, we click on the multi-views, we zoom in. If our buttons are actually over top of our geometry, the buttons will still show with the geometry behind it instead of a giant square, which would be the case if we had the color buffer being cleared with these buttons as well. Go ahead and go to the Code tab really quick because there's one thing left to do. We're going to go into the object callbacks. We're going to need callbacks for all of our buttons. We'll create one, and then we'll copy and paste for the rest. So what we're going to say is if we have a state change on our buttons, if object event is state change, we're going to say if our button's state is equal to the down state, which is 1. We're simply going to call moving eyes. We can see IntelliSense pop up. We're going to go move to eye. And move to eye takes two parameters, either an eye point pointer and a float, or a group pointer and float. We're going to use the eye points. So we're going to specify, in this case, the left camera. And 2 seconds is fine for our default value for the float, so we'll leave that alone. And what that simply says is we're going to be moving from our current eye point to our left camera, and it's going to take 2 seconds to get there. Next thing we'll do is say our handled variable is set to 1 to let GL Studio know that we handled this event, and we're simply going to return that. So that's one object callback. To get the rest, we're going to be making minor changes to this one, so we'll just copy the entire thing. Add another callback. This is the MFD, and that's the center cam. We'll add another one. This is the altimeter, and this is the right cam. And then we have one more, the back camera for the back button. And at that point, we should be about finished. We'll go ahead and save right now and generate our code. We'll go back into GL Studio, which I already have up. And at this point, we can go ahead and try to build and run our application. Now, while we run this application, I want to go ahead and open up the floor for questions from our attendees. Also, if you have any suggestions for a webinar possibly or a tech tip for the month of May, please let me know there. I'll be happy to put that in for our list of possible tech tips. So, really quick, a couple of things we're going to notice. All of our picking is still operational. I can still manipulate my altimeter and my MFD. And then these buttons up here are going to go ahead and show the same movement that we were showing earlier. So by clicking the button, we move from my point to I point, which provides easy navigation and a constant interface that always remains up on the screen. So at that point, this more or less concludes our webinar for today. I wish I could demonstrate. Actually, I can. Okay. As I shrink this screen, one more thing I'd like to show. As I mentioned earlier, the clearing the depth buffer, the best way to show this is at runtime. We can see that we actually have our object appearing correctly behind our different buttons. I'm going to go ahead and show what would happen if we left color buffer on really quick. So we go back to our multi-view, object properties, and I'll only do this for one button. Let's say we do this only for the MFD button eye. So MFD button eye, I'm going to set you to color and depth so we can actually see a contrast between the buttons. I'll go ahead and generate this code. Go back to Visual Studio, compile our generated code and run. And we should be able to see a pretty significant difference here. So as I drag this up, notice how the button for the MFD actually is showing through, like its color is being cleared, so it's coming back to gray because it's being rendered on top of the MFD. Obviously, this isn't the effect we want, which is why we only clear the depth buffer. And of course, we can see as I switch between the MFD and the ADI, from the other buttons, we see this is not the case, especially with the back button. I hope everyone that attends and everybody listening from at home sometime at a later date, I hope you have a wonderful April Fool's Day, and we'll be talking to you later. Take care.